I found the technical specifications in a church archive in filed with routine maintenance records from 1687 that nobody had examined in over a century. Installation documents for the cathedral's pipe organ describing requirements that made no sense for a musical instrument. Minimum ceiling height of 18 meters. Specific wall thickness, precise acoustic measurements for the nave. Requirements for metallic reinforcement in specific geometric patterns within the walls. And most peculiar, technical notes about the organ's secondary harmonic projection capacity, with calculations showing effective range of 400 meters and biological resonance optimization for frequencies between 20 Hz and 8,000 Hz. This wasn't documentation for installing a musical instrument. This was documentation for installing acoustic projection system with specific biological targeting capabilities. This was engineering specifications for frequency weapon disguised as church organ. And the requirements weren't unique to Salzburg. Similar documents appear in cathedral archives across Europe whenever the records survive uncensored. The organs weren't built for music. They were built for something else. Something that required enormous acoustic power, precise frequency control, and architectural spaces engineered specifically to amplify and direct the sound, something that authorities decided populations couldn't know about after Tartarian civilization fell. The organs themselves proved they weren't designed primarily for music through simple analysis of their capabilities versus musical requirements. A typical cathedral organ has between 2,000 and 8,000 pipes. That's far more than necessary for any musical composition. Has a range extending well below and well above human hearing. Has power output that's literally painful at full volume within the cathedral space. Has controlled mechanisms allowing simultaneous precise manipulation of dozens of different frequencies. And most tellingly, has pipes specifically designed to produce frequencies that create no pleasant musical tones. Pipes tuned to infrasound below 20 Hz that humans can't hear but which affect biological systems. Pipes generating ultrasonic frequencies above the range of musical perception. These aren't musical instruments that happen to have some non-musical capabilities. These are acoustic systems designed for biological frequency projection that can also produce music as secondary function. The music was socially acceptable reason for installing massive frequency generation systems in population centers, was explanation that allowed the technology to be deployed openly while hiding its actual purpose. The cathedral architecture makes this undeniable. These buildings weren't designed for worship and then happened to have good acoustics. They were designed from the ground up as acoustic resonance chambers optimized for specific frequency amplification. The nav dimensions follow precise mathematical ratios that create standing wave patterns at biologically significant frequencies. The vaulted ceilings aren't aesthetic choice. They're parabolic reflectors, directing sound toward the congregation with laser-like focus. The stone columns are positioned to create interference patterns that amplify certain frequencies while canceling others. The metallic elements embedded in walls and floors aren't decorative. They are conductive pathways that carry vibration through the structure, turning the entire building into resonant cavity. Modern acoustic analysis of Gothic cathedrals shows they amplify frequencies in the 7 to 8 Hz range by factors of 40 or more. That's precisely the Schumann resonance frequency. That's exactly the range that affects human consciousness and biological function most strongly. The buildings are tuned instruments, and the organs are the mechanisms for playing them. The biological effects are documented in historical sources if you know what you're looking for. Medieval accounts of cathedral services describe phenomena that sound like acoustic manipulation of consciousness. Accounts of entire congregations experiencing simultaneous visions during particular musical selections. Descriptions of healings occurring during organ performances. References to specific organ pieces that induced trance states or ecstatic experiences. Reports of people feeling profound physical effects vibrations through their body. Altered perception. Temporary loss of motor control during certain musical passages. The standard interpretation treats these as religious ecstasy or mass hysteria. But read carefully. They are describing biological responses to specific acoustic frequencies. They're documenting that the organs were being used to affect human consciousness and physiology through precisely controlled sound. And the effects weren't random, weren't just emotional responses to beautiful music. Were specific, reproducible, and achieved through technical manipulation of frequency rather than artistic manipulation of emotion. The frequency ranges prove the organ's actual purpose. Musical instruments only need to cover the range of human hearing, from about 20 Hz to 20,000 GI. But cathedral organs routinely include pipes generating infrasound as low as 8 Hz and ultrasound above 30,000 Hz. These frequencies serve no musical function. Humans can't hear them. They don't contribute to musical compositions, but they have profound biological effects. Infrasound at 7 to 8 Hz affects the human brain directly, induces altered states, can cause fear, anxiety, or euphoria, depending on amplitude and combination with other frequencies, can affect heart rate and breathing, can influence brainwave patterns forcing synchronization with the infrasonic frequency. Ultrasound above 20,000 Hz affects cellular function, can stimulate or inhibit biological processes, can heat tissue, can affect nervous system function. The organs were built to generate these frequencies, were built to project them at high amplitude across large populations, were built as biological frequency manipulation systems disguised as musical instruments. If you're starting to question whether church organs could really be frequency weapons, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me if you've ever felt physically affected by organ music in ways that seemed more than just emotional response, because what I'm about to show you proves that the organs were integrated with cathedral architecture to create acoustic systems capable of affecting human biology at the cellular level. The power generation is what makes these systems remarkable. Modern pipe organs require electric blowers to generate the air pressure needed to sound the pipes, but original cathedral organs operated without electricity, used massive mechanical bellows driven by human power or by water wheels and windmills. The engineering required to generate sufficient air pressure mechanically is extraordinary. Some cathedral organs required teams of 20 or more men operating bellows continuously to maintain pressure. That's enormous human energy input for what's officially just a musical instrument. But it makes perfect sense if the organ's primary purpose required much higher power output than music alone would justify. If the goal was biological frequency manipulation across 400-meter radius, affecting thousands of people simultaneously, then you need acoustic power far exceeding musical requirements. The massive bellows systems weren't excessive for musical purposes. They were necessary for frequency weapon purposes. The atmospheric pressure collection systems are documented in some cathedrals, but their purpose has been misunderstood. Metal arrays on cathedral roofs connected through conductive pathways to the organ mechanisms. The standard explanation says these were lightning protection or decorative elements, but examination shows they're positioned and configured to collect atmospheric electrical charge. Shows they connect to metal elements within the organ structure. Modern analysis proves that wind flowing over properly configured metal arrays generates electrical charge through triboelectric effect. The cathedral roof arrays were collecting atmospheric electricity and using it to power electromagnetic components of the organ system. Were providing electrical energy to the acoustic system without requiring external power source. This is the free energy technology we've documented in other Tartarian structures, integrated into the organs, allowing them to function as hybrid acoustic electromagnetic systems rather than purely mechanical instruments. The electromagnetic component explains capabilities that pure acoustic systems cannot achieve. Several historical accounts describe organs producing effects that sound like electromagnetic field generation. References to organs that made metallic objects in the cathedral vibrate. Descriptions of people feeling tingling or electrical sensations during certain performances. Accounts of compasses being deflected when specific organ stops were played. These aren't acoustic effects. These are electromagnetic effects. The organs weren't just generating sound. They were generating electromagnetic fields through mechanisms integrated with the acoustic system. The combination of acoustic pressure and electromagnetic fields creates biological effects far more powerful than either alone. Creates the kind of comprehensive biological manipulation that explains the extreme effects described in historical accounts. The organs were hybrid systems. were combining multiple frequency domains, acoustic and electromagnetic, to achieve biological targeting that pure acoustic weapons couldn't accomplish. The targeting capability is visible in the architectural design. Cathedral layouts aren't random. The position of the organ, the configuration of the nave, the placement of columns and chapels, all of it creates acoustic focusing, creates zones where sound is amplified and zones where it's suppressed. Modern acoustic mapping of cathedrals shows they have areas where sound intensity varies by factors of 10 or more depending on position. The builders could target specific areas of the congregation, could create acoustic effects in some sections while leaving others relatively unaffected. This is acoustic beamforming. This is directed frequency projection, and it requires sophisticated understanding of wave physics and architectural acoustics that supposedly didn't exist in medieval period. Yet the cathedrals demonstrate precise acoustic targeting achieved through pure geometric design and material selection. The frequency combination capabilities prove these were systems rather than instruments. Cathedral organs can generate dozens of different frequencies simultaneously, can control the amplitude of each independently, can create complex interference patterns through precise frequency mixing. This is what modern electronic frequency generators do. This is capability required for sophisticated biological targeting, because biological effects often require specific frequency combinations rather than single frequencies. The organs could generate the acoustic equivalent of targeted pharmaceutical cocktails, could combine frequencies that individually had minimal effect but together produced profound biological responses, could adjust the combinations in real time based on observed effects. This is adaptive frequency weapon technology. This is capabilities that modern military acoustic weapons are only beginning to achieve, and cathedral organs built in the 1200s through 1700s had all of it. The biological targeting proves this wasn't just about affecting consciousness. Different organ stops are documented as having different effects, some inducing calm and receptivity, some creating anxiety and fear, some stimulating physiological arousal, some suppressing it. The organists weren't just musicians, they were operators. Were trained in which combinations of stops and frequencies produced which biological effects, were using technical knowledge, disguised as musical knowledge, to manipulate congregations biologically. The religious framework provided perfect cover. Any effects could be attributed to divine presence or religious experience. Nobody questioned why specific pieces produced specific effects, because the framework explained it through faith rather than physics. But the operators knew they were using frequency combinations to induce biological and psychological states, were using technical systems to manufacture religious experiences that would keep populations compliant and controlled. Subscribe now and drop a comment about whether you think frequency manipulation could create religious experiences, indistinguishable from genuine spiritual states, because what comes next shows exactly how the organs were used for population control and why they're true. Purpose had to be hidden when Tartarian civilization fell. The population control applications are visible in the timing and context of organ use. Major cathedrals held regular services requiring attendance, required populations to expose themselves to the organ frequencies routinely, weekly or even daily in some cases. This is chronic, low-level exposure. This is exactly what you'd design for long-term biological manipulation. Not acute high-intensity effects, but subtle, persistent influence over months and years. The frequencies could maintain populations in specific psychological states, could suppress rebellion through frequency combinations inducing calm and acceptance, could stimulate religious fervor during services through frequencies affecting emotional centers, could even affect health through acoustic stimulation of immune function and cellular repair. The regular cathedral services weren't primarily about worship. They were about frequency exposure, were maintaining biological and psychological control over populations through mandated exposure to acoustic systems disguised as religious music. The architectural distribution proves this was systematic program rather than coincidental effect. Cathedrals were built in every major city, were positioned centrally ensuring maximum population coverage, was spaced to provide overlapping acoustic reach. This is the same network topology we've documented in other Tartarian systems, is distributed architecture designed to ensure populations across vast territories have access to the technology. Orientees, case ensuring populations couldn't avoid the technology. The cathedral network was frequency control grid, was infrastructure for maintaining biological and psychological influence over European populations, and it worked through pure geometric design and acoustic physics requiring no electrical power, required only human energy to operate bellows and skilled operators to select appropriate frequency combinations for desired effects. The suppression of this knowledge occurred gradually as Tartarian control weakened. The organ builder guilds that understood the biological frequency applications were systematically disbanded in the 1700s and early 1800s. The training that included frequency effect knowledge was eliminated. New organ builders were taught purely musical principles, were taught the instruments existed solely for worship music. The technical documentation showing biological capabilities was removed from archives or reclassified. The operators who understood frequency manipulation for consciousness effects died without passing that knowledge to successors. Within 2 generations, the organs were understood purely as musical instruments. Their frequency weapon capabilities were forgotten, were hidden in plain sight because the framework for understanding them as anything other than musical instruments was eliminated from collective knowledge. The weapons remained functional, but the knowledge of how to operate them for biological effect was lost, or more accurately, was deliberately suppressed. The few attempts to recover the knowledge face obstacles we've documented in other domains. Researchers investigating biological effects of specific organ frequencies lose funding. Papers documenting consciousness alterations from infrasonic organ pipes are rejected from mainstream journals. Acoustic engineers who analyze cathedral architecture as frequency projection systems face professional marginalization. The suppression continues because acknowledging the organ's actual purpose requires acknowledging that populations were subjected to biological frequency manipulation for centuries, requires acknowledging that religious institutions were complicit in technical control systems, requires recognizing that what we call worship might have been technically induced biological states rather than genuine spiritual experiences. Those acknowledgments threaten to many established narratives. Threaten religious authority, threaten the entire framework of how we understand medieval society and the role of the Church. So the evidence is ignored. The capabilities remain hidden, and populations continue sitting in cathedrals exposed to frequency systems they don't understand because the people operating the organs don't understand them either anymore. The modern measurements prove the biological effects even when modern organists don't understand what they're creating. Researchers using biometric sensors on cathedral audiences show measurable physiological changes during organ performances. Heart rate synchronization across the congregation, brainwave entrainment to specific frequencies being generated, cortisol level changes indicating stress response or relaxation depending on the piece being played, galvanic skin response showing emotional arousal that exceeds what music alone typically produces. These aren't subjective reports. These are objective measurements showing that music affects human biology in consistent, measurable ways that correlate with specific frequencies being generated. The effects occur even though modern organists are selecting pieces for musical rather than biological reasons. The instruments still work, still generate the frequencies, still produce the biological targeting. The operators just don't know they're operating frequency weapons anymore. The specific frequency combinations documented in historical organ-building manuals reveal the biological knowledge that was deliberately hidden. A manuscript from 1643 describing organ construction includes sections on harmonic medicine listing specific stop combinations for various effects. One combination using 8 Hz infrasund, 528 Hz, and 4000 Hz upper range is documented as inducing profound receptivity to instruction. That's mind control. That's acoustic manipulation of consciousness to make people more susceptible to messaging. Another combination using 7.83 Hz bass frequency with harmonics at 432 Hz and 963 Hz is noted as promoting spontaneous healing of afflictions. That's acoustic medicine. That's using specific frequency combinations to stimulate biological repair mechanisms. The manuscript lists dozens of such combinations with specific biological effects, and it was removed from circulation in the 1750s. Was classified as dangerous medical information, was buried so thoroughly that modern organ builders have no idea these specifications ever existed. The military parallel proves the technology works because modern acoustic weapons use identical principles. LAD Systems Project Infrasound to create disorientation and crowd control. Sonic cannons use focused acoustic beams to incapacitate targets. San. Military has extensively researched biological effects of specific frequencies for weapon applications, and the effective ranges, the frequency combinations, the biological targeting capabilities they've achieved after decades of classified research all fall within what cathedral organs could produce 500 years ago. The military isn't pioneering new physics. They're rediscovering principles the Tartarians understood and implemented at architectural scale. The cathedral organs were more sophisticated than modern acoustic weapons in some ways, had broader frequency range, had more precise control, had architectural amplification creating power levels modern portable systems can't match. We're treating as cutting-edge military technology what was publicly deployed civilian infrastructure in Tartarian civilization. The healing applications explain why cathedrals became pilgrimage destinations. Historical accounts describe miraculous healings at specific cathedrals, chronic conditions resolving after exposure to particular organ performances, disabilities improving after repeated attendance at services. The standard explanation attributes this to faith and divine intervention. But examine the details and patterns emerge. The healings cluster at cathedrals, with particularly large organs, correlate with specific services and specific musical selections. Show the kind of reproducibility you'd expect from technical intervention rather than random divine favor. The cathedrals with organs generating optimal healing frequencies became known for miraculous cures, became pilgrimage sites, drew populations seeking healing who would then be exposed to the acoustic frequencies that actually were healing them through biological mechanisms disguised as religious miracles. The frequency healing we've documented in other Tartarian systems was integrated into religious infrastructure, was deployed at population scale through cathedral network, was maintaining health across European populations through mandated weekly frequency exposure disguised as religious obligation. The psychological manipulation applications are even more disturbing. Specific infrasonic frequencies induce fear and anxiety. Others create calm and contentment. Others stimulate aggression. The cathedral organs could generate all of these on demand, could be used to calm restive populations, could be used to generate fear and anxiety before pronouncements requiring frightened compliance, could be used to create ecstatic religious experiences that bonded populations to religious authority, and all of it was attributable to divine presence rather than technical manipulation. The perfect crime, the perfect control system. Technical biological manipulation that the subjects experienced as religious experience and therefore never questioned. Modern mind control research using electromagnetic frequencies is trying to achieve what cathedral organs accomplished through pure acoustics centuries ago. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're recognizing that religious architecture might have been population control infrastructure using biological frequency manipulation, disguised as houses of worship, because what I need to show you now is how this connects to everything else we've documented about technology and why recovering this knowledge threatens current control systems. The integration with other Tartarian technologies shows this was comprehensive system rather than isolated capability. The cathedrals collecting atmospheric electricity to power electromagnetic components of the organs, the same free energy principles we've documented in other structures. The architectural acoustic optimization using the same geometric principles visible in star forts, administrative buildings. The biological frequency targeting using the same understanding of how specific frequencies affect cellular function that we've seen in healing chambers and longevity systems. The cathedral organs weren't separate technology, were node in integrated network, were part of civilization-wide infrastructure using acoustic and electromagnetic frequencies for biological optimization and population management. Understanding any piece threatens to reveal the whole. Threatens to show that Tartarian civilization operated on fundamentally different principles than our current systems, had technology for biological and consciousness manipulation far exceeding what modern authorities possess or admit to possessing. The elimination of the knowledge required comprehensive suppression across multiple domains. The organ builder guilds disbanded, the training manuals destroyed or hidden, the biological effects documentation removed from archives. The theoretical frameworks explaining how frequencies affect biology suppressed from emerging scientific disciplines, the religious institutions convinced to treat the organs as purely musical rather than technical, and most effectively, the populations trained to experience the effects as religious rather than biological, to attribute consciousness alterations to divine presence rather than acoustic manipulation. To never question why specific pieces had specific effects, because questioning implied doubting divine providence. The suppression worked through multiple reinforcing mechanisms, ensuring that even if someone noticed the patterns, even if someone recognized the biological effects, the framework for understanding them as technical, rather than spiritual, simply didn't exist in available knowledge systems. The modern continuation shows the infrastructure still operates, even though the operators don't understand it. Cathedral services still occur. Organs still play. Populations still gather for exposure to the frequencies. The biological effects still occur. Heart rate synchronization, brainwave entry, emotional manipulation through infrasonic frequency generation, all happening every Sunday in cathedrals across Europe, all attributed to religious experience. All accepted as normal part of worship. The weapons are still firing, are still affecting populations biologically. The operators just think they're making music. The targets think they're experiencing divine presence. Neither recognizes they're participating in technical biological manipulation, using infrastructure that's operated continuously for centuries, despite the knowledge of how it actually works being systematically suppressed. The recovery resistance shows this suppression remains active. Research proposals to study biological effects of cathedral organ frequencies are rejected as trivial or inappropriate. Funding is denied for investigating consciousness alteration from architectural acoustics. Papers documenting measurable physiological effects of specific frequencies are dismissed as irrelevant to musical or architectural studies. The academic gatekeeping ensures serious investigation doesn't occur. Ensures the knowledge remains suppressed. Ensures populations continue experiencing technical manipulation as religious mystery. The resistance isn't just passive institutional inertia, is active prevention of investigation that might reveal what the cathedrals actually are, what the organs actually do, how populations have been subjected to biological frequency manipulation for centuries under cover of worship. The religious establishment faces existential threat from this knowledge becoming widely recognized. If cathedral services are understood as technical biological manipulation sessions, if religious experiences are recognized as acoustically induced altered states, if healing miracles are attributed to frequency medicine rather than divine intervention, then the entire theological framework collapses. Then churches become technology operators rather than spiritual guides. Then worship becomes biological engineering rather than communion with divine. That's not just loss of authority, that's complete dissolution of the conceptual foundation on which religious institutions rest. The churches can't acknowledge the organ's actual purpose without destroying the framework that gives them social authority. So they maintain the suppression, maintain that the effects are spiritual, maintain that the organs exist for musical worship, and prevent anyone from investigating too closely what's actually happening when populations gather for frequency exposure disguised as religious services. The modern acoustic weapons programs prove governments understand the principles even while suppressing public knowledge. Military research into infrasonic weapons, sonic crowd control devices, acoustic systems for inducing disorientation and compliance, all based on the same frequency ranges and biological targeting principles the cathedral organs used. The classified research budgets are enormous. The capabilities achieved are kept secret, and the historical precedent in cathedral architecture is never acknowledged, because acknowledging it would require explaining why civilian populations were subjected to the same techniques now classified as weapons, would require admitting that religious institutions deployed biological control systems, would require recognizing that what we call progress in acoustic weapons is actually recovery of capabilities that were publicly deployed infrastructure in previous eras. The military classification of acoustic weapon research serves double purpose: develops new capabilities, while hiding that those capabilities aren't new, maintains suppression of historical knowledge, while secretly rebuilding it. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what you need to understand is that you've probably been affected by these systems without knowing it, and recognizing the effects is first step toward defending against manipulation you didn't know was occurring. The recognition markers are subtle but consistent, feeling physically different in cathedrals beyond what aesthetic appreciation explains, experiencing emotional shifts that seem disproportionate to the music alone, noticing heart rate changes or breathing alterations during organ performances, feeling vibrations through the body at frequencies you can't quite hear, experiencing altered time perception during services. These aren't spiritual experiences necessarily. These are biological responses to acoustic frequencies, affecting your nervous system and cellular function. Once you recognize them as technical rather than spiritual, once you understand you're being exposed to frequency systems designed for biological manipulation, you can consciously resist the effects, can recognize when the frequencies are inducing states rather than just appreciating music, can protect yourself from manipulation by understanding the mechanism. The defensive knowledge is simple but effective. The effects require sustained exposure. Brief cathedral visits produce temporary alterations. Regular attendance produces cumulative effects. Understanding that allows you to control exposure, allows you to limit the biological manipulation by limiting time spent in the acoustic field. The effects are strongest in specific locations within cathedrals. Acoustic mapping shows zones of maximum intensity. Positioning yourself in lower intensity zones reduces exposure, and most importantly, conscious awareness disrupts the manipulation. The effects work best when subjects attribute them to spiritual experience rather than technical manipulation. Once you recognize you're being exposed to frequency weapon, once you understand the biological mechanisms, the psychological effects diminish even if the physiological effects continue. Knowledge is defense. Understanding that cathedrals are acoustic systems rather than just religious spaces fundamentally changes your relationship to the effects they produce. We sit in cathedrals experiencing biological frequency manipulation as religious transcendence. We attribute technical effects to divine presence because that's the only framework we've been given for understanding experiences that don't fit normal consciousness. We participate in systems that affect our biology, our emotions, our thoughts, without recognizing them as systems, because the knowledge of what they actually are has been suppressed for centuries. The organs aren't musical instruments that happen to affect us emotionally. They're biological frequency manipulation systems that happen to also produce music. The cathedrals aren't beautiful spaces that inspire worship. They're acoustic projection chambers optimized for biological targeting. The services aren't communal spiritual experiences. They're mandated exposure sessions, ensuring populations receive regular frequency treatments that maintain psychological and biological states desired by authorities who built and operated the systems. The evidence is overwhelming. The architectural optimization for specific frequencies, the biological effects measurable with modern instruments, the historical documentation of frequency combinations for biological purposes, the modern military parallel proving the principles work. The systematic suppression of investigation into what's actually occurring, all of it proving that cathedral organs were Tartarian frequency weapons, were population control infrastructure, were biological manipulation systems disguised as religious instruments, and they're still operating, still affecting millions every week, still producing the effects they were designed to produce. The only difference is that now nobody knows. Now the operators think they're making music. The subjects think they're experiencing God. And the authorities, who should be explaining what's actually happening, are invested in maintaining the suppression because acknowledging the truth would destroy too many foundational narratives about religion, about history, about the benevolence of institutions that subjected populations to technical biological manipulation for centuries. The weapons are hidden in plain sight, are operating continuously, are affecting you right now if you attend services, and recognizing them is first step toward recovering knowledge that was suppressed specifically to prevent populations from defending against manipulation designed to keep them compliant, controlled, and convinced that their technical subjugation was divine grace.